You're going to hear an exceptional young man tonight speak, and Craig is a great inspiration to a lot of people. First, let me just deal with a couple of housekeeping items. There's a couple of books. One of them will be in a package tonight for you called The World Needs Your Kid. And the other book I want to refer to is Me to We, which is a book that was written by Craig and his brother Mark, which is a brilliant book. So it's not in the package, but if you want a copy of it, just sign up and let us know, and we'll make sure you get one. There's also a newsletter. A lot of you have accounts with us and our donor advised fund, PGF. So this is a newsletter that our partner Mark Terrio wrote just recently, a little bit about the process of giving and the process of establishing and creating those accounts. So if we can help you with that, we'd love to do so, because that's what the evening is about. It's about philanthropy. One of the things we're kind of proud to announce today is we've been working with Craig and the We organization to get involved in sponsoring a particular project. This one is in Kinambu in Ecuador. It's a small village on the Amazon, and my partner Wayman just got back from there, and he said he was fighting piranhas and deadly snakes and 12-inch spiders, and we don't have any pictures of these things, of course, but we'll take him at his word. So we've committed to this village $250,000 over the next 5 years to try to help this village become self-sustaining. And that's really a large part of the mantra that Craig and Mark and the We organization have. I need my glasses for the next one. So this is an interesting quote on philanthropy. If you can't read it, it says, "We make a living by what we get. We make a life by what we give." Winston Churchill. And I think it's interesting because I got some images of Craig. What is this young man? Is he the host of We Day? Is he a partner with his brother Mark? Is he somebody that can spend time with the Dalai Lama or talk to Oprah about how to get the right funding to build the organization, amazing organization they have, to work in so many villages and build so much sustainable outcomes around the world? Who is this person? So I thought, I could read all of these things, but it occurred to me that this was something that was better said in an article or a video that came out from 60 Minutes.
The things that we're thankful for tend to come from people who devote their lives to something greater than themselves. Many folks come to that devotion late in life, but Craig Kielburger discovered it early. As a 12-year-old in Canada, he read about the murder of a boy his age in Pakistan. Iqbal Masih was a slave in a carpet factory. Masih escaped to lead a campaign against servitude, but within 2 years he was silenced. Kielburger put down the newspaper and rose to speak. He made Iqbal Masih's fight his own. He talked to classmates, to Congress, to Parliament.
Why you?
Why not?
11 friends wanted to help. With no money to start with, they met in his living room and started a charity called Free the Children.
So Free the Children today is the world's largest network of children helping children. So what that means in practice is we inspire kids. Then we give them all the tools they need to learn about these issues. Speaking tours, summer leadership camps, curriculum every week. Our bet that we're making is if you give kids the inspiration and the tools to change the world, it'll change their own lives also in the process. And the ripple effect is incredible.
Are we ready for We Day?
You can feel that ripple in the Free the Children celebrations that Kielburger calls We Day. He does as many as 9 of these a year, and when we came to this one in Vancouver, there were 20,000 kids. We Days feature acts like Nelly Furtado, Jennifer Hudson, and lectures by activists including Nobel Peace Prize winner Desmond Tutu.
We Day isn't just a day. We Day is a movement that happens all year long.
Kielburger is joined on stage every We Day by his older brother Mark.
You coming together and taking action.
When we see in the stadium all those faces of all those kids, how did they get there?
You can't buy a ticket to We Day. Any kid can earn their way in for whatever cause they care about. Half local, half global, and they're there. These are kids who have done, bake sales and car washes, and they've started their own charities. And when they leave, they bring that inspiration. We Day is just the beginning.
We followed that bake sale money back to St. Anne's School in Bridgeport, Connecticut. Free the Children recruits through schools, almost turning them into chapters of the global organization. There's so much trouble in the world.
Yes.
When we met 11-year-old Magdalena Dutkowska and 12-year-old Joey Hopkins, they were headed to Kenya. This is one of the places that Kielburger set out to change, the Masai Mara in Kenya. Joey Hopkins and Magdalena Dutkowska raised enough money back in Connecticut to join other volunteers to build a new classroom here. Over the last 10 years, 130 schools have been built in Kenya. Sharon, let me start with you. What does this school mean to you?
It means a lot to me because at first I could not even talk to people like you now. I did not understand English well, but now this school has helped me a lot to know more English and gain more confidence.
How long have you been in this school?
1.5 years.
You've learned this much English in 1.5 years?
Yes.
That's amazing. How many of you think you're going to go to university? Everybody. At the end of the project, the Maasai honored Magdalena and Joey with a celebration and a traditional gift.
Really tight. Hold it really tight. You got it?
Yeah, I got it.
By the time they cut the ribbon, it was hard for us to figure which kids had gained the most. The Kenyans got a new classroom, but it was the American kids who learned. They can be the change in the world.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Craig Kielburger.
Good evening. My voice is loud enough. I'm not sure I need this. We'll try one more time. Good evening. So what this very kind man did not say in his introduction is the last time that I saw John, we were together in Toronto on Thursday, was it? Thursday. So we were together in Toronto. We didn't know that each other was going to be there, a bit of a surprise. We were at a packed ballroom where I had the pleasure to see this man walk up to the podium to accept the Waterstone, in partnership with National Post, CEO of the Year Award for Culture in a company of that market cap. So can we please welcome and celebrate Vancouver's own. He gave a fabulous address. In fact, it was fun to say Vancouver stole the show because it was you and Darren Entwistle. So the two, Vancouver, there's something about the culture in the water here, to say the least, and the view and the mountains and the snow. But my gratitude not only to you and to your biological family, but also to your work family, because you spoke so beautifully from that podium, calling them your extended family. And so to all the wealth advisors, to those who are kindly allowing me to be here, to those of you who invited your clients and people who trust you so intimately with their life and with their dreams, thank you for inviting them to be part of this evening. So my gratitude to you and to your remarkable team. If I could also say thank you, the Seagulls are here. Some of you might know Lauren and Melita and Matthew. They're, in fact, Lauren is the chair of We Day here in Vancouver. So what 60 Minutes showed you by filming in Vancouver, he is the chair of that, and their wonderful family that brought this here. I know we also have David. I saw Pam. Quentin, good to see you. So thank you to the Richardsons who have also been on those bumpy roads in Kenya supporting agricultural projects. And I know others here have been involved with our work, but most importantly, many of you have involved your children. And some of you grandchildren, some of you nieces, nephews, and the young people in your life. And that's really why I know you're all here this evening, and you're incredibly busy. But we hope that when you leave here, you might leave here with one new tip on how to start a conversation with the young people in your life, a couple actions on how to ground service into family traditions, maybe a little bit of a roadmap of over the holidays, how to turn it into a time to discuss causes. But mostly, if you're here tonight, you care about giving back. You self-selected to be in this room. So we know that we have people here who want to genuinely make a difference. And I suspect the cause that all of you care the most about, more than anything in the world, is your own children and your nieces and your nephews and the next generation. And to make sure that they leave with that same set of values that drove you to be here today. So that is the intention of tonight's conversation. I'm just going to ask for someone's help to point out where the wonderful clicker is. Thank you. So as you know, we have the honor to spend a lot of time in Vancouver welcoming amazing young people who come together and join us at celebrations. And so in case you're curious what 20,000 young people look like when they come together to celebrate. As mentioned, We Day is part of what we do. Also, We Schools. So We Day, I should say that we have the pleasure to host 16 of these every year. We're the largest charity in the world on Facebook. Millions engage and celebrate with us. We Schools is now in 8,000 schools across Canada. We're Canada's largest youth organization. We work in the US and the UK and countries around the world. We Villages, where we connect families and youth with sister villages around the world. And Me to We, a social enterprise that seeks to fund what we do and to keep an efficient admin rate. The reason why I wanted to start by just sharing that with you is to say we have the privilege to work with a whole lot of young people. So in any given year, about 3.4 million youth engage through a registered action with us. So that's a generation of young people who, through their schools or through the local or the global or their service in their communities, make a difference. And so we've been able to learn a few things over this 20-year journey of how do you light a spark with young people and get them excited on a cause? How do you help them nurture their gifts so they know they can make a meaningful difference? And how do you reinforce it in a community? And so those are the chapters of the journey that I'm hoping we can go on this evening and to walk through 4 chapters, starting with the North Star. If I could ask your help answering a question, and this is not a rhetorical question, I really actually do need your help answering this question. If you were to complete the sentence, I would be a successful parent if my child were. If you were to pick one word, just one adjective to finish that sentence, and there's no right, there's no wrong answer, but what your North Star would be, and this can be for those of you whose kids are a little bit older now, maybe as grandparents, or for those of you who maybe don't have youth in your life, again, as that uncle or aunt. But I'd be curious if you had to pick that one word, what it would be. Kind. 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 Happy. Passionate. Filled. Fulfilled. Fulfilled. Compassionate. He stole yours, okay. Well, we'll give it to him in the line of giving. And anyone here in the back? I know people in the back traditionally are always a little bit more silent, but yes, I have a roving mic, so I'm going to come to you over the course of this evening. Respectful. Do you have teenagers? Okay. How you doing, Thomas? Okay, good to meet you, buddy. We might pick on you a few times tonight, just to warn you. Okay. Anyone other words here? Involved, caring, generous. Do you have teenagers? 10 and 12. Okay. Any other ones? Any other burning words? Empathetic. Empathetic. I don't know who shouted that one out. Empathetic. I stole his. Oh, okay. Empathetic. Wow. Wow. Okay. I love it. I had 4 kids, he said, so I learned the hard way. Here's something interesting. When you go to, say, a barbecue at a friend's place, or a nice evening dinner conversation like tonight, people often ask, hey, tell me about your kids. And you say, someone's captain of the football team, and, they're doing really well in varsity, and, hey, the latest marks came out top of the class, and, little Jimmy and Johnny, they're off to, this university. And kids hear that. They hear you describe them. They hear words. They associate what's important. You sign them up for certain extracurriculars. We reinforce certain things. You know, I'm born in Canada, raised in Canada. Our global headquarters is proudly in Canada. We now work with school districts and young people all around the world, and I spend a lot of time lately in Texas. We're opening our Texan offices. We have 5 U.S. offices, and it's fascinating, Texas. Texas, they love their bumper stickers. And I always see these bumper stickers. They're like, my child is captain of the football team. My child is valedictorian. My child goes to such and such university. I have never seen a bumper sticker that says, my child is happy. Or my child is generous or kind or empathetic or responsible. Although there's a whole lot of that one. It would be great to see on bumper stickers. You know, the truth is, as parents, you know, and yes, we're at an event, I realize the kind of bias is the answers because we're talking about raising kids who care and contribute. But the truth is that North Star that you believe in, and I think at your heart of hearts, it's true. If you had to make a choice, what you care most about is raising a young person with a good head on their shoulders and a perspective of the world and gratitude and empathy and a fulfilled and a confidence in themselves and a desire to make a difference and a passion and a compassion. So much of that can be lit through helping a young person find their cause, develop the leadership skills, find their passion in life, give back and make a difference, develop that empathy and engagement, that responsibility and respect. And so it's interesting, this study was actually a study, this sentence was posed to parents in 42 countries around the world, different cultures and languages, religions, everywhere from China to Canada was included in other countries. And when you look at these words, these were the words that came in last globally. These were the words that came in first. Looking at the different North Stars. You know, I know everyone here has been incredibly successful in business and in wealth creation. You know, I got an MBA myself, and I had this one prof who kept drilling it into my mind that, you know, in every business, you have to have a solid business plan. Where are you going? Well, I believe that it's the same with raising kids. And I hope that over the course of this evening, maybe if nothing else, and we have just scratched the surface, maybe when you're driving tonight to keep the radio off or not to turn the cell phone on until you get home, and maybe to start that conversation asking your loved one, your spouse, your partner here, what would be your North Star? How would be the word that you'd complete that sentence? You know, when I was a kid, as you saw in that video, and man, I haven't seen that video in a few years. That was fun I don't know where you found that. When I was a kid, I started a tiny children's charity here in Canada. A few years on, the phone rings. And there's a very formal, very British sounding voice on the other end of the phone. And basically the voice said, they were calling from the office of His Holiness, the 14th Dalai Lama. And they said that this was, the exact words were, this was the chief of staff to the Dalai Lama, looking for Craig Kielburger's chief of staff. So, it gets better. My mom answered the phone, and she was not amused that she was my chief of staff. And she calls out to the backyard, and it's like, Craig, you know, come on inside. I'm tromping on inside and pick up the phone. She thought it was a prank call. It was the Dalai Lama. And he invited me to this gathering where they were bringing different people from cultures and religions and continents and men and women and different faith leaders, and they wanted to have the diversity of the world represented. And then they panicked a week before and they realized they had no young people. And so he actually said, would I represent the youth of the world? I'm like, sure. And basically sat in a room about a quarter of this size with people like Arthur Schlesinger Jr. were there, and like these incredible minds, and Brundtland was there, and like, you know, like former heads of state and Kennedy advisors, and we were given one task for an entire week to discuss one question. And the question was, what is the single greatest challenge facing our world today? And if we had more time, I'd actually ask each of you again, I'd be curious, like, I imagine the diversity of answers would be fascinating. You know, what is the single greatest challenge, what you would say. But we started looking at hunger, and then we looked at war and peace in the Middle East, and we looked at climate degradation, and we started to look at all these issues, and again, it swirled around in conversation again and again and again, until finally, but they kept saying, but you know, we know how to solve that issue. We've put a man on the moon. We can invent the technology. If we had the will, we could actually create the solution that, And this issue of will kept coming up to the extent that they came to the conclusion that the single greatest challenge facing our world is that we're raising generation after generation of passive bystanders. That again and again and again, society keeps raising young people to say, it's not, government will solve that problem. Someone else will, that's not my, and we see the horrors of that in the extreme of the Holocaust, of course, where the term passive bystanders rose, but we see it again and again now with Syrian refugees and crisis and poverty. And how do we raise young people to tackle the great challenges of our world? And so this group concluded that the single most important people in the world were not CEOs, were not world leaders or heads of state, but they were parents. And I believe deeply that the single greatest title that any of you would hold on your business card, if it was on a business card, is parent or aunt or uncle. And so I know that as you're here today, this is what we want to talk about. What emerged from that gathering was actually such a fascinating topic that I actually went up to the Dalai Lama and asked him, could we continue this conversation? And we ended up traveling together and over the period of a number of years, embarked on a project where we interviewed over 400 individuals. Some were heads of state and Nobel Peace Prize laureates, others were psychologists, others were parents and young people, always with the question of how do you raise children to care and contribute? How do you help the next generation to find their passion? So tonight, our talk, our time together is informed. Sometimes I'll share a stat and research, sometimes a personal story, often because I believe people learn best through storytelling, reflections with world leaders and moments that were shared ranging from Nelson Mandela to Mother Teresa as we talk about lessons that emerge from their lives that can be incorporated into our daily lives along this journey. This is, by the way, the book that you leave with, and so any of the stats or facts you'll have with you to carry. Why is this important? To the parent who said responsible, that was you, right? Respectful. Respectful. Someone else said responsible. I'm going to pick responsible and respectful if I could bring both together for a moment. Studies show that when a young person finds a cause and gets involved in meaningful actions, it shifts, yes, the outcome on the cause, but fundamentally the youth themselves. The University of Virginia, for example, did a fascinating study. Can I ask, how many of you are parents to high school students? Oh, okay, so just a handful. How many are parents to middle school students? Okay, elementary school students? Okay, grown young people? Okay, do we have any grandparents with us? Oh, fascinating, great. Okay, so we have an amazing age range of kids. So by the way, this talk is gonna start about engaging young people, like younger people, like children, and then it's gonna pull all the way to young adults by the end. So we're gonna bring you on a journey of relevance. But the University of Virginia did a fantastic study where they randomly divided high school students. Those who had a structured spare period and those who had a service learning program. So within the class time, they would engage in service in the community. After 4 years passed, and they saw, and this was multiple schools randomly divided to ensure control. After those 4 years passed, students who volunteered that service learning program, where they thought they would get lower grades, because the other kids, they had a spare, they had more time to study. But no, the students involved in service learning got higher grades, more likely to go to university or college. But here's the interesting things. 3% lower rate of teen pregnancy, less likely to use or abuse drugs, higher self-efficacy and self-esteem in self-reported studies. That generally these young people made more positive life choices. So they were certainly more responsible, I don't know about respectful, but definitely more responsible in how they engaged. Study after study shows that when young people get involved in positive pro-social behavior, they find peer groups that reinforce it. Teachers look at them that way, and that is a reinforcing mechanism. Oh, that's the good kid. They do great things in schools. They define their self-worth not by the clothes they wear or their boyfriends or their girlfriends, but instead their self-belief. They make choices that you as parents would value, that we as society celebrate. And so even if at the end of the day, you don't buy into the whole thing that raising good kids is just good, even if at the end of the day you're like, you know what? I really want my kid to get into Harvard. I really want my grandkids to go on and be very successful in the traditional sense of the word. this is still relevant. This still applies just as much. So making kids, in fact, one of the greatest things you could ever do for your son or daughter is get them to help someone else. So today we're going to be talking about, again, lighting students' sparks, young people, developing their gifts and helping them to bring this together for a better world. So part 2, lighting the spark. So you heard how my spark was lit. It was a young boy from Pakistan. You saw that story, that article about a young child slave. Group of friends. I went to my 7th grade class, got up in front of them holding this article in my hand saying, I need your help. Thornhill, a little north of Toronto. After I gave this impassioned talk as close as I could, I was the kid with the speech impediment. I was nervous. My hands were shaking. I didn't even know what I was doing. And I said, would you join? And 11 hands went up. So there were 11 plus me. There were 12 of us. By a fluke at the time, we were all 12 years old. So we called ourselves the group of 12 12-year-olds. That was actually our founding name. It lasted for 2 weeks until one of us had our 13th birthday. Somehow we didn't really see that coming. And then we changed it to Free the Children, and then we kept growing around the world. And actually, when we hit our 20th anniversary, we changed it to the We organization. Tell you stories why, but suffice to say, originally we were mostly working internationally. Now we work half in Canada, half around the world, and engaging kids to find their cause. So we wanted something more inclusive. But it changed my life in this moment where one morning, and by the way, when I say we were grassroots, you can't get more grassroots than us. Like, this was our doghouse. That was our first fundraising stand. That's our grade 6 science fair board of how we share the message. We ran this over the summer months, and then September rolls around. And I sit down with my mom and my dad. I got an older brother. He had moved out of the house by this point. I was off to college. And we sat down together, and I said, Mom, Dad, this isn't a passing phase. I got a plan. I want to take 2 months off school. I just started grade 8. My parents are school teachers, so they love that beginning. And I said, I'm going to go traveling to go meet these kids we want to help. And so I'm going to go to Pakistan and India and Bangladesh and Thailand, and since I'm there anyways, Nepal. And I said, but don't worry, you won't have to miss any work because I'll go on my own. Can I go? So my parents looked at me and my mom said, Craig, we love you very much, but you're not allowed to take the subway downtown Toronto by yourself. So no, going to Asia is out of the question. But I asked again. The next morning I asked again, then I asked again, and I asked again. I know a lot of you are parents here, so you know that asking again and that asking again and asking again. And my mom, and I imagine there's a lot of patient mothers in the room, but my mom teaches children with special needs, so she is patient. But even she looked at me in one moment, she said, Craig, you are not allowed to ask Kent even think about it unless, you already, unless you had half the money raised and you proved that you were safe, and until then, I don't want to hear a word. And when she said that, I went, yes. And started shoveling driveways to save up money. We normally get more snow than you do, but aside this winter. And started writing letters to groups and found a chaperone who would take me and set off on this journey that changed my life. And came back home from that journey, and just the organization kept growing and growing and growing. But that actually brings us to the first lesson on how do we light the spark with young people. When we embarked upon this book, we asked a very simple question. We wanted to probe, how did young people first find the cause that they cared about in their lives? Describe for us the moment, and describe for us, and when we started asking these questions, young people would start to describe not the earth-shattering finding a newspaper article or embarking on a journey halfway around the world to Asia. At least my journey wasn't the norm. How most young people found their cause was very different. And so it actually made me stop and reflect and say, was my story all that different, or maybe it wasn't? Because for me, maybe the lighting of the spark was this article, but the fuse was lit long before, and I believe it was probably the same with your family. So here's my family. It's my mom, my dad, myself, my older brother. And you know what? As I mentioned, we grew up in Thornhill, so when we would go to downtown Toronto, it was a big deal in my house. And my mom cannot walk past a homeless person. It's not physically possible. Now, in my childhood, we didn't have as many panhandlers, and Vancouver has probably the highest number in Canada. So I know this might not be as relevant in your life, but for my childhood, my mom would always stop. And my mom had what I jokingly called a mom purse, one of those really big purses that would took her a while to dig through to find things. And she would stop and she would ask them their name and how long they'd been on the streets and did they have a place to stay this evening. And as my brother and I, we would basically be rushing ahead because we were all excited. We were going to the Eden Center, we were going to the movies, we were going someplace. And she would just pull us into the conversation. You see, my mom, what I actually didn't even know until I was older in life, was my parents came from pretty humble backgrounds. And part of my mom's childhood, she was actually homeless. And she never forgot what that was like. And so that always stayed tucked in the back of her mind. And so she always wanted to stop and have that conversation. And years later, and that was something I didn't even know until I was well into my teens. And so years later, I made this comment to her how it was nice how she was helping these people. And my mom looked at me and shook her head and said half the reason why she was nice was to help these people, but the main reason why she did it was for my brother and I to stop and to look that person in the eyes and to acknowledge their humanity. And my mother doesn't, speak in the most poetic of verses, but I've never forgotten that phrase and the teaching behind that. When you look at the studies, study over study again and again tells you the way that most young people find their cause, the way that it lights the spark, it's very simple. They point to role models. They point to parents. They point to aunts or uncles, someone who role modeled the behavior, the old Gandhi expression, be the change you want to see in the world. So, how do you do this? Well, over the course of this talk, I'm just going to toss some occasional tips out there. They might resonate depending on the age of your youth, they might not, but we'll go through in total about 30 or 40 of them, so just pick up the ones you want. But maybe it's cleaning closets for a cause. As a family, a great one, if you've got younger kids, is emptying out the closets together when the weather changes and together bringing it to donate it. Maybe it's the turning the birthdays and the holidays, especially traditions like bar bat mitzvahs, where there's that mitzvah project, that tikkun olam idea, or any faith idea of service, baking in how to give back. Maybe it's the jar of loose change, where as a family it piles up, and every quarter, like 4 times a year, the family sits together and has a conversation and says, this is what we're going to support. Small amounts, but to kids, that seems big. These small actions where you start to model the behavior, even at the youngest of ages. Changing the world starts at home. My brother and I had the honor to spend time with Nelson Mandela. We were doing some work with his charities in Africa. Now, when you meet Nelson Mandela, what do you ask Nelson Mandela? Like, what can you possibly ask this man? So we asked him the question, what is the greatest lesson on leadership you've ever learned? And I don't know exactly what I thought he'd say. Thought maybe he'd reflect on 27 years in prison, or what it was like, post-apartheid, trying to bring a nation together. His famed remarks, our greatest fear is not that we are powerless. Our greatest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. But he didn't reflect on either of those moments. He reflected on his childhood memory. He said all the great lessons of leadership that he ever learned, he learned when he was a kid, the most impressionable ages in his life. He was reflecting on the fact that, and I know many of you know this, Nelson Mandela's life is well known, but he grew up so poor that he couldn't afford a pair of shoes, and so poor that he didn't think he'd have a chance to go to school. And so he was told from a young age that his life journey was going to be a shepherd. He was going to be in charge of the family's sheep and goats, but he didn't mind because as a kid, that was his world, and he thought this was a giant responsibility. So he was so excited when he was about 5 or 6 years old. And his parents brought him. They brought him to the enclosure where all the goats and the sheep were. And his parents said, you're now in charge and you're an adult now, 5 or 6 years old. You're a big man. And so he's kind of fumbling with the latch, you remember, and he opens it, and he's ready to lead them, all the goats and the sheep out to pasture. And of course, he becomes a leader in that moment and does what he thinks a leader should, swings open the gate, turns around, starts to march ahead, ready to lead the goats and the sheep to pasture. Except no one told the goats and the sheep. They all stayed. He marched ahead. He went back to them. He yelled at them. He was getting a little red. He remembers getting embarrassed. His parents were cracking up. The older siblings thought this was hilarious. He's trying to tell them, follow, where are you going? What's wrong with you? Why don't you? And his parents didn't intervene. They could have easily stepped in and solved it, but instead, he had to eventually figure it out. That in fact, the only way to get the goats from there to where they were going was he actually had to go behind them. He had to push them. If they went a little too far to the left, he'd have to tuck them in. A little too far to the right, he'd have to tuck them in. But if anyone looked from afar, this is why it never clicked for him until he did it himself. Because if anyone looked from afar, they would assume the goats and the sheep were leading. They were the first ones to finish. They got to the end. Here he was, at the end. The goats and the sheep got there first to the conclusion. They arrived. He was bringing up the rear. And he said he learned in that moment of his childhood the most important leadership lesson he ever learned. To lead his flock from behind. Nelson Mandela then emerged into one of the great leaders of our time, of course, healing the rift of apartheid. But these are actually the hills of his childhood, and these are the memories that he was reflecting on. I had the honor to be at his funeral, and I was sitting next to the counselor in his region. And at the time, Prince Charles was there, and the counselor was sitting next to me saying, "Can you imagine, the son of the Queen is here for someone from our village?" The intendant said, "A heck of a lot more than the son of the Queen is here. The whole world is watching this." What does that mean? How do we start a journey? For those of you who have younger children, again, it will get a little bit older as we go through the talk. But how do we start it? Well, responsibility. Making that change in the world actually starts not with philanthropy and fancy words, not with gala dinners. Studies show it starts at home, literally around the kitchen table, ensuring that your children have chores. Studies show that young people who have chores have higher levels of engagement post in life in service. They are more likely to take action to help others if they see they have a sense of responsibility to help their family. So here's a very simple one, setting the table. When I say changing the world starts at the kitchen table, I'm not kidding. I know families, if you think how the traditional kitchen is designed, you've got all this tableware, all the glasses way up high, you've got all the cutlery, you've got all the cooking apparatus in the bottom. Flip the order. Turn your kitchen upside down. Put all the plates and all the cups where kids can reach them below. And they have the responsibility to open that up and to set the table. No table? It's not set, no food. No one's eating tonight. That sense of responsibility, that they are the enabler, starting at the youngest of ages. Allowance splitting. Parents. Gosh, I know we have the honor to work with a heck of a lot of wealthy individuals, including a number of billionaires. And I always love that they give their kids $10 in allowance a month. Why? Because that's a lot of money if you're like 6 and 7 and 10. And they still make them save. What are you going to save? What are you going to spend? What are you going to give? Starting that tradition of allowance splitting starts the conversations. Here's something we don't tell kids and we just tell the parents. Studies show that having a pet raises empathy. So if any of the spouses here want to negotiate and say, we're getting a dog, you could say, I went to this talk this evening and I've heard for the sake of our children, to raise empathetic, caring children, we need a Labradoodle. So studies overwhelmingly show that when kids have a sense of responsibility and agency, and if pets are the better than plants, doesn't extend to plants, hate to break it to you, because they can immediately see the facial reaction in the pets and the well-being and the engagement and the food and the walking. So when they know they're responsible for someone, it starts to nurture at a young age. Creating teachable moments. Archbishop Desmond Tutu, another great famed activist from the Nobel winner and from the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa. He got involved in our work when I was quite young and very kindly helped to mentor us in their startup days. And when I was doing my undergrad, I was at the University of Toronto. And we were juggling starting this charity and traveling to countries that are pretty tough where we do some of our work, and studying peace and conflict studies for my undergrad, so it felt like I was staring at stuff in the textbook that was pretty tough. And so I made this passing comment to him one day. I said, you know, see so much negativity in the world? Stop reading the newspaper. He looked at me, and he folded his arms. And his exact words, he said, college boy, what are they teaching you kids in school today? And he said, the newspaper is not a collection of all the violence and the negativity. He said, the newspaper, that's God's to-do list, delivered right to your front door every morning. He went on to say that, you know, we live in a world, and I'm not going to get too faith-based, but I know a lot of people's philanthropy here is rooted in faith. Depending on your faith tradition, I believe this works if you had a tradition or no tradition at all. I don't think there's a booming voice on the road to Damascus. But I do believe that there's a newspaper that lands in our front door. And that's a simple but powerful reminder that we have a responsibility. And there's two ways to live in this world. One is to turn that channel, to flip that newspaper, to keep engaging. The other is to see every single day as a daily reminder that we can do better and be better. My dad, how he read the newspaper is not like this, but like this. And for parents, for those of you here who ask, busy lives, I got kids, they're maybe a little bit older now, we're starting to get to like mid to tween years. How do we get them to focus and pay attention? How do I even bring up philanthropy? How do I talk to them about causes? Literally every day you have a conversation starter for. You know, whether you're using a tablet or a newspaper, it doesn't matter. You know, starting by what's happening in the world. In fact, it's conveniently divided for you. You want to talk about local issues, first section, national midway, international, it's almost always at the end. So choosing to see the world in one set of eyes or choosing to see it in another. So here are some simple tips for how to start the conversation to light the spark. You know, of course, actually I'm going to use the last one, newspaper together. I've always referenced that one. Here are some simple, easy actions. In our organization, we bake things K through young adult, kindergarten through young adult. I don't think it's ever too young to start changing the world. Some actions we do, for those of you who've got younger kids, how do you start the conversation? We do something called We Scare Hunger, where kids on Halloween knock on doors collecting food for local food banks. They collect 10 million pounds of food. This is the largest one-day collection for food banks in this country. And think about it, Halloween, it's the perfect occasion. It's a Halloween, it's like a holiday owned by kids. You know, they knock on doors, they connect, they reach out anyways. You know, here's another one that we do. We create change, where young people collect pennies. Everyone's got extra pennies. Yeah, they're going out of style, literally. So they collect pennies, and in 1 year, they collected 140 million pennies in Canada alone. In 1 year. You stack that vertically, you would reach the International Space Station 6 times in pennies. Or one of my personal favorites, we do a campaign called We Are Silent, where kids take a pledge, because to raise awareness about bullying, to go silent the entire day. Moms, dads, you can thank us for that later. But if that is not reason alone to sign your children up for our programs, I don't know what is. We in fact have a kit, you can download this online or you can just get it from our office, with cue cards to start a conversation over the dinner table. So if you still, after all this, go, I don't know how to bring this up to my son and daughter, there are literally cue cards where you can role play and start the conversation. Conversation starters, simple questions from a young age, asking about moments they saw around empathy, all the way up to older university students asking what they're studying and learning. A child's identity. Here's a cool study for you. We're still in lighting the spark. Boston did an interesting study in their public schools. They took a group of students who were 7 and 8 years old. They said, and I love this study, because I actually think that half the studies kids don't have a fun time, but in this study, kids had a Really good time. They go up to the school, they say, I'm sorry, there's no school today because a local toy company needs you to test out toys. Like, what a great study. The kids play and they win the equivalent of, little toys, and they win the equivalent of those little coupons, like those old-fashioned ones you traded in for a prize in the fair. Well, here's where the study starts. There's there's a little bowl, a little bowl, and it has a sign, and the sign says, help poor children. And they kind of cajole and nudge the kids to put something in the bowl, and no matter what, everyone puts a little bit in. And then one of three things happens. The control group, they say nothing. Just thank you. The reinforced action group, they say, thank you for giving. Giving is a good thing. The reinforced trait group, they say, thank you for giving. You must be a giver. Slight difference. One, you reinforce the action. One, you reinforce the trait in the person. 2 weeks later, another person shows up at the school, wraps up the study this way, gets up in front of the same kids and says there's a local hospital asking people to make greeting cards for people in the hospital, whole bunch of art supplies in a corner. If you want to take some home, make some greeting cards, drop them off, we'd be appreciative. Here's where the results come in. The control group, the thank you, and the reinforced action group, thank you for giving. Giving is a good thing. Those kids made about the same number of cards. The reinforced trait group, thank you for giving, you must be a giver, made on average double the number of cards. Here's why I love this study. 2 weeks. 2 weeks for kids who are 7 and 8 years old. Think of how much happens in 2 weeks. All they learn in school and the playground and the recesses and the cartoons and the cootie moments and everything that unfolds. And somehow tucked in the back of their mind, a total stranger 2 weeks ago said to them they must be a giver. They are a giver. That identity lodged. And because it lodged, subconsciously 2 weeks later when given the chance, they make double the number of greeting cards. As parents or grandparents here, this should both terrify you, that what people say to your kids lodges in the mind, and it should inspire you that what you say to your kids and the identity you create lodges in their mind. Parenting 101 is when kids do something bad, you don't say, you are bad. You point the action was bad. But it's the inverse when kids do something good. You don't say, the action was good. No. You are a giver. You are caring. You are kind. You help the world. That identity gets continuously reinforced again and again and again. So how do we nurture this in kids? Well, lock it in the family calendar. When you sit with your kids around the breakfast or dinner table, plan every month what is going to be right in that family calendar for service. Why? Because you are giving. Because we are a giving family. Because that is who we are. Just as important as a meeting, put it in your smartphone, lock it there. Really, one time a month? 2 hours? 12 times a year? Heck, if that's too much, once a quarter. But lock it in there as a family. Youth heading a family project, one of the things that's so important about young people developing that sense of self-identity is they have to be the one in charge. It's not mom and dad saying, we're going to come and do this. But make sure that they have part of the role, that they do something, some part of the planning. And lastly, I got to say, I love this study. Out of all the studies we ended up reading and researching, and oh my gosh, there are hundreds of them in child developmental psychology, I, of course, married a psychologist, and this is what she does. And so I feel like at home we talk about this all the time. But why I love this is because it reinforces the idea that we need to continuously say, you as a young person are a good human being, changing the world, and you deserve to be celebrated. That's partially why we put this little party on with a dear friend of ours. And we invite a whole lot of people to come. And so, you know this, but John, in fact, has extended the invitation to any of you who want to come. And so whether you want to be Lauren's guest, David's guest, John's guest, any of their guests, you can choose who you like better between the three of them. And come and hang out. We, every year, throw a wee day in Vancouver. And by the way, we also do one in Seattle. It's April 21st in Seattle, and in Vancouver, it's end of October. Oh, no, it's November 1st. I know that. This year, it's November 1st. So I'm pretty sure. Angie's looking at me. I'm pretty sure. So April 21st in Seattle, Coach Carroll and Russell Wilson are our co-chairs. Like, come on. How can you not have fun with those guys up on stage? And we're going to be having a great party again back in Vancouver on November 1st. Bring your children. Bring your nieces. Bring your nephews. Bring your grandkids. I don't care if you think they're too young. If they are 6 or 7 and 8 years old, have them stand in that stadium and say, 20,000 kids, they all earned their ticket through service to be here. That reinforces the idea that change in the world is possible and cool. And when your kids earn the way, then that reinforces that they must be a giver. Here's a quick clip of what We Day looks like.
Born out of a dream, two brothers, fueled by the desire for change, by the hope that the world can be a better place. They called it
We Day. More than an event, it launches a year of actions for social change.
You can't buy a ticket to We Day.
You earn it through service.
Tens of thousands in attendance.
Hundreds of thousands watching online.
Millions watching on TV.
We Day is the movement of our time.
The We movement helps to support your passion for a better world.
It's time to stop complaining that there's nothing to be done and instead actively take steps to doing something.
Together, we can truly live we.
For everything that divides us, there's so much more that unites. Believe in the power of we.
I stand here in front of you as living proof that we can redefine what is possible.
I tried to change who I am, and I realized I don't know how to be anything but myself.
I know we all have some weaknesses, but it does not mean that we don't deserve to be special.
I was born with one finger on my left hand and a lower leg that was curved in, and this hasn't slowed me down at all.
We Day is all of you, the few, the dedicated, coming together to change this world. Tonight.
Some people don't think it's cool to help others. Personally, I think it's the coolest thing in the world.
We Day was phenomenal. I've never experienced anything like this before.
We Day has changed my life. Like, I'm so impacted. I can't even describe to you. I'm so excited to get started.
Are you ready to change the world?
You guys are awesome, We Day.
We hope to see you there to come on out and join us. Okay, so we've talked about the North Star. We've talked about how to light the spark. Now we're going to talk about discovering the gift, helping every young person discover their gift. Now, in order to do this, I need help. Specifically, I need the physically strongest person in the room. The physically strongest person. This is not, we are Canadians, so no one actually volunteers themselves in Canada. Unlike Texas, where like half the room stands up when I say that. So who is, like friends and family out the person next to you, who does like a lot of reps and bench presses and who's working out? Come on, you're pointing this. I love how you're looking the other way. Like you are like, your dad is pointing at you. You're like, man, look at this fascinating, look, he's pointing, everyone's pointing at you. Quentin, how you doing? Great, come on up. Oh my gosh, how, okay. Well, we definitely got height on your side. Okay, Quentin, can you hang out 1 second? Don't go anywhere. Okay, so we had the pleasure to meet Arun Gandhi. Now, if you don't know, Arun is Mahatma Gandhi's grandson. Now, growing up, some people like cheered for Gretzky, a different generation, Babe Ruth. Gandhi was what was on my walls. So when I met Arun Gandhi, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm such a fan of your grandfather. Tell me a story. Tell me something about him that I've read all the books. I've actually, literally, I know it sounds incredibly geeky. I've done the pilgrimage that he walked in India. Like, big fan. And he started to tell me a story that at one time he asked his grandfather, how did you know that we would win against the British. And to answer the question, at the time, Maroon was actually doing his homework. And the grandfather walked up to Arun and said, well, to answer your question, can I borrow your pencil? Thank you, by the way, for buying these pencils on short notice. And he handed the pencil to his grandson, and he said, and by the way, before we do this, by the way, how tall are you?
6'7".
6'7". Man, what sports do you play?
I was a rower in university.
So how intensely do you have to train to be a rower?
Incredibly intensely.
Okay, so what would you like? You know, you'd like row, but what else do you do?
These days, running.
But would you do like squats, for example? Oh, yeah. So what could you squat at your height?
Couldn't even tell you.
Okay.
250.
250. More?
More. Mostly.
More? Okay, and what could you bench?
Rowers don't.
Oh, they don't bench. Good point. Okay, lower body, not upper body. Hey, I never rowed. Okay, so a lot of working out here. Okay, so now based on your years of training, do you think you can snap the pencil?
Absolutely.
Okay, he's confident. Okay, yeah, turns out you're right. Can you come over here? Can you join me over here? Okay, so yeah, no, that wasn't too challenging. Okay, let's see this. Let's make this a little more interesting though. Let's pull out, you know, you're 6'7", so we're gonna jump up to 4 pencils. Okay. So quick show of hands, how many think you can take 4 pencils? How many don't think you can take 4 pencils? Who is waiting for the over-under odds of Vegas before they announce their intentions? Okay. Okay. He did not even crack a sweat. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is a 24 box, by the way. 6, 7, 8. Okay, 8. Okay, you can use a knee. You can use anything. You'd like those knees trained by years of 250-pound squatting. Okay, wait. Yeah, 8, yes, no. Yes, no. Where's our yes? Who's our yes? Who's our no? Oh, tough crowd. Okay. Your dad's with you at least. Your mom, I actually didn't really see you. I don't know. Okay. Do you want to use a knee? No? Oh! Just saying. Ye of little faith in this room. You may have all made oodles amount of money in the stock market, but you did not bet on this commodity here. Okay. Okay, do me a favor, and can you hold that? Okay. I was a scout in a former life. You don't think I come prepared? Okay. Who thinks you can take on these? Your dad's hands! I'm not even going up. No way? You're abstaining? Okay, you still tried. I gotta admire the hoops, like to still give it a little bit of assessment. Can we give him a round of applause? Thank you so much. Thank you. True story. Mahatma Gandhi handed this to his grandson. His grandson snapped 1, snapped 2, struggled but managed to get 3, and was stopped at 4. Yeah, you did a heck of a lot more than that. And Mahatma Gandhi said to his grandson, but why? And he said, well, yeah, 1 was easy, 2. Yeah, 2 is easy. 3, you struggled a little with 3. He says 4, but when they're all together, 4, it's unbreakable. And in that very simple moment for Arun Gandhi, he learned an incredibly important lesson. Now, I know many of you know the story of Mahatma Gandhi's famous salt marches. He led millions of people in India at the height to go to the edge of the Indian Ocean to dip in buckets and to let the water evaporate, leaving behind salt. Now, salt was taxed by the British, so what he was doing was an act of civil disobedience. Of course, it was Gandhi who inspired MLK, who inspired Lech Walesa, who inspired some of the great nonviolent movements of our time. But in that simple moment, the first time he tried, it was a few dozen that were tossed in jail. The next time, it was a few thousand, and some of you may know they were brutally beaten. And then after that, he went back, and hundreds of thousands, millions joined him in the salt marches. And that was the moment that the back was broken of the British Empire. It didn't matter if it was the most powerful empire in the world. Why do I love that story? Well, it's such a simple way to teach children a truth, that when we come together, we are unstoppable. So one thing that's incredibly important is to create a family action plan together, not just the youth on their own. Let me share another story. And this one is a story of what I hope you will do tonight when you're home. We had a group of young Canadians travel to Ecuador with us to build schools, high in the Andes Mountains, so high that the only way to reach here was a winding mountain goat path. It was harvest season, so we couldn't get our supplies up because they were bringing their harvest down. So by the time our supplies arrived, we only had a couple days left on the build. We bow our heads to the village chief, and we say, we can't finish the school with this group. Don't worry, we'll have more volunteers come in, but we can't finish it now. The chief says, no problem. I'll call a Minga. It was an aha moment. Actually, how it really sounded was she went to the edge and she had this like tiny lady, huge voice, and she shouted, Minga! And it like echoed like Minga, Minga, Minga. It carried through the room. It carried through the valley. We had no idea what was happening. The next day, hundreds of people started to appear. Women came with babies strapped to their back, and the men left their tools in peak harvest season. And the kids, they went running. They literally, like Greco-Roman times, would run to the next village. No phone, no electricity. To tell them a Minga was happening, the kids would be panting and exhausted. And then they would run to the next village to tell them a Minga was happening. And then run to the next village. And then start with a few dozen, and then 100, and then hundreds of people came out. Total strangers on their way to market. Everyone. And I turned to the village chief and asked, what is a Minga? And the village chief said that according to the Purahe Indians, it's how they refer to themselves, the Purahe Indians, that some things are so sacred, and so is a Minga. Anyone can invoke it. And when you hear this word Minga, you stop whatever you're doing, and you come together for the collective good. And when she described this word, the power in this idea, she was speaking in Quechua, her language. And it was being translated, Minga coming together for the collective good, into Spanish, and then Minga coming together for the collective good into English, and then it kept going back and forth, Minga coming together for the collective. Finally, she spoke a little bit of English, and she realized we weren't just translating the word, we were translating the whole idea. And so in broken English, she says, Minga, coming together, people, collective good. What's word in English? What's the word that we say and total strangers spontaneously stop whatever they're doing and help each other in the streets? And the first thing, we all kind of huddle together and we're like, okay, well, what's the word? I don't know. It's like barn raising. You ever seen barn raising? Volunteers. If you shout volunteers, does everyone come running? Psh, not where I'm from. And they're going back and forth and, having this conversation. And we're trying to, you can't keep the chief waiting. It's an insult. And then we finally blurt out. It's like, well, what happens when everyone takes the street spontaneously? We're like, oh, we got it. It's like a riot, but for good. All those riots for good that we have in Canada. Yeah, and to this day, I'm kind of afraid. She calls it the riot for good time, trying to bring people together. We do not have a word for Minga in our language. And the truth is, we need one. And language reflects culture. The more words you have for something, more important is your culture, anthropologists tell us. The Purahe Indians have a fascinating belief. They believe that how you form community is by coming together and helping. It's kind of like the opposite. North America, I'll help you if you're part of my community. But for the Purahe Indians, how you become a community is side by side engaging in a helping action. We need Mingas in families. You want to bring a family together, give what a psychologist calls them a superordinate goal. Give them something more important than any one individual, something that actually bonds the family together, something they all need to be part of, something that everyone's unique gifts and talents have to lean in towards. That's when a family truly comes together. That shared sense of identity, that shared sense of self. We need Mingas in communities. We need Mingas in faith groups. We need Mingas in nations. We need Mingas around the world. And so I want to challenge you tonight. When you get home, for those of you who have parents still living with you, have children still living with you, or grandchildren, or nieces or nephews, shout the words, get up on a chair and say, Minga! Your children will come running. Maybe not for the right reason initially. And if they're teenagers, they'll be like, yeah, mom and dad. But when they're there, explain to them what a Minga is and say, as a family, you're going to call a Minga. As a family, everyone is going to come together. All let's vote. Let's pick what the cause is. What are we going to do? Hopefully we talked about starting that conversation, letting that spark, finding your cause. But as a family to pick a Minga project, something together to create an impact. Sounds corny but true. Create a family mission statement, especially if you got younger kids. Great way to start the Minga. What is that our family stands for? What are our values? Put it up there and frame it. If kids are a little bit older, consider a global service trip. Consider lifting a roof together. Nothing bonds a family more. Literally, they do the cliched Hollywood films for a reason, building a room, building a house, lifting that roof. The truth is, it's tough to find those bonding moments as a family. So please, if you see one, if your kids bring it to you, seize the opportunity. I'll talk more about service trips in a moment. The opportunity for continual learning. Now we're getting a little bit older, obviously, with kids. When I was 15, this lady changed my life. It is helpful when Oprah does a show on your charity. The show was about kids making a difference. And this surprise, because it's Oprah, so everyone, of course, got a surprise. We didn't all get cards, but we got a different surprise. Someone walked out with a giant novelty check from Pompton Lakes, New Jersey. This kid had heard about what we were doing. They were inspired by our work. They wanted to help fundraise for a school. So he hands the check. We all clap. That's supposed to be the end of the segment, except, of course, this is Oprah. So Oprah goes off script. And her exact words were, I'm Oprah. I love how she started that way. Yeah, I'm Oprah. I want to build 100 schools. We'll be right back after commercial break. Literally, that was the entire thing. I didn't even leave the couch until her lawyers came down, because it's not a live show, it's live to tape. And her lawyers leaned in and it's like, Oprah, actually they said Miss Winfrey. Miss Winfrey, that was a great thing, but should we maybe tape that ending again? She's like, no, I thought the energy was good. Oh, yeah, Miss Winfrey, the energy was great. Everyone was genuinely surprised. But should we, tape that one more time, maybe a little bit shorter this time? I thought our time was good. No, yeah. Your time was good. It was very good. But Miss Winfrey, here's the thing. They're Canadian. We don't know them. That was literally their big problem. They're like, they're from Canada. I still remember her saying, I'm sure they have charitable laws in Canada too. It'll be okay. The next day, I found myself sitting across from a man named Tim Bennett. He's the CEO of Harpo, which is Oprah spelled backwards in case you want to know the name of her company. Sitting across from him, he leans up to me and he says, so, Oprah just made a 10 million, I didn't realize the size of that, gift to you as 15-year-olds. I'm sure you've got currency hedges in place to mitigate against fluctuating costs of international building and paraseismic engineers to ensure the liability risk is contained. And I'm sure you've got monitoring and governance and third party. You guys have no idea what you're doing, do you? And he looked at us and shook his head and he said, you have two options. Option one, we cut that from the tape before it goes to air. Like option two. Option two. Whatever option two is, we like option two. Option two, we invest, he did calculation, actually turned out to be a lot more than he thought it was, about another $5 million into building best-in-class admin and legal and accounting and architects and infrastructure and third-party monitoring and evaluation to ensure that there was no vicarious liability to Oprah. Totally, needless to say. She did 5 more TV shows with us. We ended up building all of our schools around the world except her South Africa Academy, changed the course of our lives. Here's the thing about Oprah. She is a tough lady. And I say this with such love and respect. You don't get to be Oprah unless you are flippin' smart. And we would go once a quarter to present to her, and she would just tear us to shreds. She would ask every question you could imagine. on the sustainability and the operations and the third party, and what about this and what about that, and I want the kids tracked, and I want each of their stories, and why aren't their marks going up, and what about the infant mortality and the maternal mortality and the gender parity rates. Like, this lady runs her business, or I should say she runs her charity like she runs her business. So we initially started building schools for kids. That was the pledge. But very quickly we realized that after 18 months, girls weren't going to schools. The enrollment rate fell off. Why? Because so often they had to walk and get dirty, polluted river water. So we started bringing in water. But because Oprah wanted the third-party measurement and evaluation, we started tracking it, and we found the industry norm across most nonprofits, 40% failure rate of water projects within the first 3 years. Why? By definition, you put water projects where people are poor. They can't afford often the diesel to keep the pumps running. They can't do repairs. Turns into a hunking, rusting heap of metal, which they can strip and sell the metal. So how do you make sure that doesn't happen? Got to bring in small businesses to make sure there's a revenue stream and sustainability is built in so the community can afford to maintain the water projects in the schools so that when you phase out. But what's the number one reason why small businesses fail in developing countries? Because of a health shock. They'll strip out their capital. They'll sell it. They can't work. So you got to make ssure health is in place, food security. What quickly emerged from spending time with her was this incredible, I have an MBA, I learned more from the MBA of Oprah. And I feel that my view of philanthropy was shaped first and foremost by business minds. And to treat it like a business. Why do I share this? Many of the youth in your lives will, and I'm getting a little bit older obviously in this journey here, will inherit sizable sums. And this team, I'm sure, will grow that, so it's a very sizable sum. And you want to make sure that they have the skill set to make sure that they do philanthropy well. It's easy to do good, it's hard to do it well. And to ensure that, it's best to start learning and failing and growing at the youngest of ages. So if you've got teenage kids or even young adults, start with small amounts, 5, 10, whatever definition of small is to you, 1,000, 10,000, God bless you if 100,000 is small. Whatever the amount is, that you want them to start learning and growing and trying, and sit with them and really challenge them. How do they identify their intervention? What is unique about their model? Is it truly sustainable? When we start conversations with families, we always say, step 1, decide your cause. Step 2, what's your definition of success? Because this is the question, as you start to really look, are you addressing the root cause or are you addressing a symptoms? And there's not a right or wrong answer. We got to feed people today, but we also have to prevent hunger in the first place. We got to give them housing today, but we also have to ensure they have jobs and long-term creation of wealth. So how do you create that intervention? 3, invest in measurement. For no other reason than it's going to teach your kids to learn about successes and failures. There's a lot of third-party groups that come in and will help coach through that process, pre-planned sustainability. If they're going to create something new, help them understand how to make sure that that will be long-lasting and not year after year after year have to write a check. And lastly, then, only after you've gone through all of that, then choose your intervention. Choose how you'll make a difference. But if you've got to start defining success, looking at that measurement, end in mind, what will your exit be, all before you give that first grant or decide what that intervention will be. Let kids and young leaders start learning and growing, because I can assure you, even with the best in class, it took us years to develop the learning to truly succeed. I also want to say a special thank you to our friends here. John and the entire firm have rallied together, and they've decided to actually adopt a village. They've taken on the 5 pillars, providing education, clean water, healthcare, food security, and alternative income generating cooperatives. They're doing that over 5 years till the village is fully economically self-sustaining. And when they phase out, the community can continue to lift themselves forever further out of poverty. So your fees go to good use. Thank you, sir. We're almost done. Now this is when you've got young people who are in their 20s. They're starting working for you, or maybe they're gunning already for your job. Or maybe they're not interested in business. Here's something that I get a lot of. We work with a lot of owners of private companies who want to pass it to the next generation. And they find that the next generation isn't excited about making a difference. Often, in fact, what they want to do is change the world. So they'll come to us and they'll say, my son or daughter wants to change the world. So what should they study in university? What should their job be? They want to start a charity. To start with, how I always start the conversation is I get people walk up to me all the time who say, I want to work for Doctors Without Borders, so I want to become a doctor. And I say, here's an interesting fact about Doctors Without Borders. For every one doctor they employ 8 people who do logistics and operations. It really should be called Logistics Without Borders. Because if you think about what it takes to run the medevac and the systems and ensure the medical supplies and the government relations and the negotiations, and so often we get young people who want to change the world, and so they study African studies and development studies. And our charity alone, last year in Canada, had 14,000 job applicants. So just think about that for a moment. Here's an interesting fact. It is 3 times harder to get hired by us than it is to get into Harvard, the applicant to acceptance ratio. People who apply almost always have the same background, a sociology degree, an African studies degree. And you know what? We need a few people who do that. We need a whole lot of people who do finance, operations, logistics, marketing, management, like any other typical company. It's just ours is non-profit. And so when young people say they want to change the world, what should they study? First and foremost, I say, really? Go into business. Start learning how business operates. Because we need more charities to be efficiently run. I'm not saying every business is efficiently run, but we need that skill set to be brought in. And then number 2, if maybe the charitable world isn't for you, then go into business to create change. For that generation that I represent, the millennials, your kids, for many of you, they want to change the world. You have very graciously and kindly set them up well. And many of them, frankly, don't need that same hunger that maybe drove you initially to build your companies. They're motivated by something else. So if you want to get them excited about your company, show them the social purpose of your company. Richard Branson is a really cool mentor in our lives. He is the co-chair of We Day in the UK. So I like to say this, he's Lauren's equivalent in the UK. Striking similarities in many ways. Richard Branson is a bit of a character. And one of my favorite times chatting with him is he was telling me that when he started Virgin, and we all know the 300 plus Virgin companies and his enormous success and as a billionaire, the wealth he's been able to create, he said he started it because he knew what was cool for his generation. And he said it was easy. Everyone knew it. Sex, drugs, rock and roll. And that's what his generation wanted. And so he served it up for them. Virgin Music, he made it Virgin Records, was a massive success. He said if he did it again today, though, for his next generation, for Holly and Sam, his kids, who are also very involved in our work, what do they care about? Changing the world, going green, challenging and solving the problems in our world. You know, Sir Branson, here he is in Kenya with us, rolling up his sleeves, making a difference. You know, every time you fly Virgin Airways and drop your coins aboard, they go to us, so thank you for doing that. And then we get to build Virgin Villages, also known as We Villages, around the world. You know, if you fly their duty-free, you'll see they carry Rafikis, which are handmade by women artisans around the world, providing employment and empowerment. And the profits go back to fund the communities where they come from to sustain the water and the health. 1,500 women do this in their own businesses that they get to fund their own projects. And we do trips and travel, creating jobs around the world in parts of the world like South America, Asia, and Africa, where tourism is a huge income earner, so why not create sustainable travel and ensure these dollars lift these communities out of poverty? Why do I share this with you? Well, again and again and again, the next generation wants to create a difference. So, you know, literally take your kids to work. Help them understand that you create jobs. Help them understand that part of your philanthropy isn't just after hours, but it's in the business choices that you make. You know, adopt deeply a charitable cause into your company and share it with your kids. Holly Branson, interesting fact, Holly Branson, Richard's daughter, and myself and my brother, we're all actually just finishing up a book that's coming out this fall. And Holly wrote about, she is actually Dr. Holly Branson. She became a medical doctor. And she was treating one patient at a time, one patient at a time, one patient at a time. And it wasn't until she was in her like late 20s that it dawned on her. You know, she genuinely became a doctor because she wanted to do good. But how she could do the most good in people's lives was to hang up her stethoscope and join the family company. And that way, she could actually launch Virgin Health and so many other massive companies that affect millions of lives of people around the world. So making that connection come alive for your kids. And lastly, help your kids start a social enterprise. We're proud of the fact that this is a controversial statement. We don't need more charities in this country. When people walk up to me all the time, and young people do, I want to start a charity, I say, don't. Please. You know, research, because I promise someone does what you want to do somewhere in the world. Join them, or build a better model by tweaking slightly their model and partnering with them. You know, really, what we need is innovation in the sector. We don't need repetition. So social enterprises is legitimately innovation, the opportunity to create jobs and employment and empowerment. We're proud of the fact that we have a 9% admin rate. 9 cents on the dollar, 91 cents directly to youth-serving projects. How do we do that? Our social enterprise funds it. We have a long-term goal of bringing our admin rate to 0, so every penny donated goes directly to projects. That, I think, is the future of how we do good. Innovations. And so I've heard some rumors that you've had team members. I know you joined us, thank you. And we've got more of your team who's heading overseas. I want to share with you a very brief clip of what we do in hosting families and companies. If you're looking to call a Minga, here's a way how to begin.
For me, has been life-altering, something that everybody, if they can, should do.
Just to get off the airplane and look around and see the sights and sounds of a whole new country that's so different.
It's been a phenomenal experience, not just for my kids, but for my family and for me. To have the type of cultural immersion that you get on these trips, it really does change your perspective.
Interacting with the kids at the school has been my favorite part. You get to see their smiles. They were really shy the first day when we came there, and then by the third, fourth day, they're all over us.
There couldn't have been a better matching for our family. I think the biggest change for me was learning a better way to include my whole family and my passion.
The water we will drink is bottled. The food is prepared by their own kitchen, their own chef. We have these wonderful facilitators around us. They're founts of knowledge, but they also make sure that everything is seamless.
They would never put us in a situation where we'd be endangered, and true to form, that's the case again.
It is a life-changing experience. It really makes you feel like you are doing good work here, and if more people did that, I don't think so many of the problems in this world would be such a big deal.
I don't know exactly how to put it into words, but it's the best thing I've ever done.
Thank you. And if you want more information, please chat. Lauren, Melita, please chat. Please chat David, Pam. Please, a lot of people here have gone journeys with us. As our time comes to a close, we've talked about 1, the North Star, 2, lighting that spark, 3, nurturing that gift, lastly, the journey ahead. You know, some of you might remember at We Day Vancouver a few years ago, we welcomed Martin Luther King III. Heck of an amazing individual, obviously, walking in his father's footsteps. Now, those are not easy footsteps to walk in. He talks about how he felt the crushing weight of his name, his place, his legacy. And how one day he visited his mother's alma mater. This is after his father had been assassinated, and he was trying to find his life place, and others looked at him to ask, would you carry on the struggle? You know, you're the next generation. And honestly, he wasn't sure if he could. And he saw a statue there of Horace Mann, and it said, "Be ashamed to die until you've won a victory for humanity." And he remembers reading that quote, and he said it almost broke him. You know, his father won a victory for humanity before he died. But how do you follow in those footsteps? And he thought about those words, "Be ashamed to die until you won a victory for humanity. Be ashamed to die until you won a victory for humanity." And the more he thought about it, he reflected on the fact that there are so many ways to win a victory for humanity. Yes, his father won a victory for humanity on a global level. And some could win a victory for humanity on a national level. And many more can win victories for humanity in their cities. But anyone can win a victory for humanity in their families and how they choose to lead their daily lives. And he said instead of breaking him, that quote helped him reframe his life purpose. And to realize that what he originally saw almost as a burden, an impossible burden. Like, remember MLK, his famous words? Dreaming of the day, children sitting together no matter the color of skin. He was talking about his son. What was an impossible burden became instead for him a source of peace. Why do I close, as I'm nearing my end, with this reflection? Many of you are quote unquote, self-made. You have built companies and built enormous financial legacies. And where you came from, the delta of growth, to replicate that by Gen 2 or Gen 3 or whatever the next generation is nearly impossible mathematically. It is nearly impossible for many of your children. Some will, I understand. I know there's different levels of wealth here and different relative levels of wealth creation. But for many Gen 2 and Gen 3 we have the pleasure to work with, they look to their parents and they say, it's impossible to follow in those footsteps. And what instead of an opportunity that you want to create, leaving wealth that they can disperse and do great philanthropy with, can become the impossible burden and the legacy that they can never live up to. And so it's so critically important that they're able to define themselves on their own terms. You defined, many of you, your legacy by creating wealth. Allow the next generation the privilege of joining with you and forging their own legacy of dispersing that wealth and creating further impact in the world. I've seen on volunteer trips when we've brought families to build schools and work in Africa or Asia, when they put away their cell phones, and after a day of building schools, when parents lean into their kids, and these are, by the way, I say kids, like these parents are like 60s and 70s, and their kids are like 40s and 50s. And they're leaning into them and saying to them, this is why we created the wealth. We worked so hard. We wanted to give you the opportunity. And the kids are saying, but we didn't ask for the burden. But no, this is the opportunity you have to do good. And but we didn't know how. But this is why we want to do it together, and to see these beautiful conversations emerge over that roaring bonfire in the middle of the savannah in Kenya, where you can't go anywhere and there's no cell phones. So you got to finish the conversation. And as the conversation evolves, to realize that really you simply want to create the best for the next generation. And they simply want to make you proud. And to be able to embark upon that journey together is a powerful and beautiful thing. And so we can all win victories for humanity. If you're in this room, you've chosen to nurture the next generation on the journey ahead. And it will not always be an easy one, but you have friends who stand side by side. The reason why John and the team invited you to be here tonight is because they genuinely care. It would be easy for them to organize something on taxes or the latest investment tips. But they did this, and he brought his own family here for the very reason that you're here. Some things are more important at the end of the day. And so have a conversation with him. His team can help. And likewise, this is what we do. We have teams who sit, well, listen, he does the tax part. We're not going to do that. But what we do is sit with your kids. We have teams who are young in their 20s and were trained as teachers and want to make a difference, and they sit over a meal with the family, or they sit over a cup of coffee with you and a soda with the kids, And they just chat away and finding their cause. And sometimes kids will blossom, especially teenagers, in an easier way with someone else. And ask them, like, what's going on in your school? Or what are the causes you care about? And what's going on in your family? And what are the differences? And they can bring things out, like you're really passionate around mental health and there's bullying going on and you've got friends who got eating disorders and let's talk about local causes and global causes. And they can help bring out their action plans and help them plan how they're going to make a difference. You know, we have We Schools. And if your kid's school doesn't run our projects, please let us know. It's free, it's turnkey. Every week, new curricular resources. Every month, new service campaigns. We actually created a unique partnership with the College Board. So we've recreated the AP, the Advanced Placement courses. I'm going to guess all your kids have AP in their schools. They learn biology not by memorizing it, but by testing water in their community. They learn French by connecting with a sister village in Haiti. They learn AP Computer Science with We by coding real-life apps for good. They get a special notice on their high school transcript. It's the first national notice of service learning for when they're applying to college and university. And they get to learn it while they're in school. And in addition to the family trips we do over the summer and Christmas, we also have summer trips for youth. 13 and above, they can go on their own, well chaperoned, of course. You know, we also have summer camps for kids who are 10 and above. On those youth trips, when they come back home, it's disproportionately about 70% young women who go on the trips. They'll fly back, you know, often through London Heathrow because it's the way you can get to Africa or Asia. And after the trip finishes, they'll often borrow calling cards and use payphones. They often discover them for the first time. And they'll pick them up and they'll call their parents and they'll thank them. It's very sweet to see that. And a lot of the young women will then pick up a phone and call their boyfriends and dump them en masse at the airport. Now, let me, it's actually pretty funny. They're like high-fiving each other. It's like, how did you said it was me, not him? Yeah, it works really well, and he didn't argue. And to the dads here, this is not like a money-back guarantee. I'm not promising this. But I am saying that it frequently occurs. So helping others is good in the world for many reasons. I want to close by sharing with you a final thought. I had the honor to spend time with Mother Teresa when I was just a kid. I was 13 years old at the Mother House in Calcutta. And she walks up to me, curious why a kid was here. And we started a conversation, and it sounds crazy to say, it lasted for like an hour. And at the end, she walks me out of the Mother House. And I blurt this question that I had wanted to ask her, but I was too nervous to. And I said, how do you do it? And like, how do you work every single day when you know you can't help everyone and there's so many problems and the poverty in Calcutta and the need in the world and it was just this purging of a question that was so long and rambling. And she took my hands and she stared at me. When Mother Teresa stared at you, you felt like she was looking into your soul. And she said, you have to realize that in our lives, we do no great things, but we can do small things with great love, and that's how we change this world. And so, I wish you on this journey of small actions with great love every day, that we together change this world.
Thank you, Craig. Well, that was pretty inspirational, and there were a lot of things in that message. I know one of the things that resonated for me was Craig talking about the legacies. I just wondered, is there enough people here for a minga, you think?
Absolutely.
We have some time left, and we wanted to kind of keep things a little informal. So Craig is going to walk around, and if any of you simply want to get up and ask a question, don't be shy. He would be thrilled to talk to you. So Craig's going to have the mic, and hopefully that one works. And if you just raise your hand and we'll get somebody to come by with a mic, or Craig will come by your table. So is there anybody that would like to start? Be brave, ask a question. Yes.
Please. How do you square the concern about family trips to foreign locations with what may be a lack of sustainability or motives, mixed motives?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I'm glad you asked it because we have a lot of parents. It's interesting. International volunteerism is like any form of charity. It can be done very well, or it can be done very poorly. Like, I believe some social impact and some philanthropy is done very well, and honestly, I think a lot of it is done very poorly. And so how we look at the trips is, first and foremost, you've got to start, and this is not with us, this is with anyone, let me phrase it, this includes us, but any group you choose to travel with. First question to always ask is the development model sound? So do you believe that there are good projects? Are they community-led and operated? Are they highly impactful? Are they actually sustainable in creating change in schools and clean water and health? Is there an exit strategy, and is there a way that they can make sure the community will continue to run it for years to come? Next, are those projects run for the volunteers or the community? i.e., when there are no volunteers, does the change keep happening? And that's, of course, the case if we have locally owned and operated, when we phase out of a village after 5 years, owned by the community, fully economically sustainable, and when there are no volunteers, it doesn't matter, we're still doing the same work in the communities. Next question, question 3, is it a net beneficial impact, your time in the community? Are you actually leaving a real legacy? Are you doing something that truly helps net positive? There's a lot of powerful studies that when they typically show the negative of volunteer travel, they look at orphanages. For good reason, don't do it. Like, they sometimes see some groups will drop in a volunteer for 2 weeks, form an emotional bond, and then yank them out with kids. The worst way to do volunteer support. If instead what you're doing is augmenting and supporting, by the way, we don't do any orphanages and volunteer placements. We instead have people who bring in a net positive skill. So what do I mean by this? Well, for example, Ohio State University and medical groups work in our medical clinics. What do I mean? Nipissing University sends us teachers who work in our schools. They do the practicum. KPMG sends us their accountants, and they'll support women running small businesses and train them around the world. So people bring their skill sets. Sometimes it's literally building, but no matter what, they leave a truly powerful legacy. One of the concerns that often people have is you don't want to take jobs away from the locals. Here's the good news. As volunteers who don't speak the local language, who come and stay in a country, I promise you create more work. And I say that jokingly but seriously. I believe that tourism dollars are a powerful driver of economies in developing countries. I would rather you hire people in those countries to support by you being there and to support you in cultural learning. Most important of all, the main reason why people go on service trips is not for the service that you do over the 1 week or 2 weeks that you're there. Because if that's the case, just send the check. But if by going, your children will fall in love and understand the importance of making a difference, you will take that back and share it with your family. You'll continue to making a difference. When we are in the countries, yes, we help build for maybe 2-3 hours a day, but the rest of the time we're meeting with the women, learning from the elders, having evening lectures on international development and philanthropy, learning how to make a change, creating family action plans in the evenings or corporate service volunteer plans for when you get home, and continuing that impact. So net, make sure the projects are sound, make sure they keep running 365 days a year, make sure that you being there actually creates net positive benefit. Make sure that your dollars get invested locally in local jobs, local translators, local drivers, local hosting. And lastly, make sure that that journey is part of a longer journey. And if so, then my goodness, I hope you will embark upon a journey with us or with anyone, because it changes communities. It's how we manage to fund a lot of our work, and it's how the community sees amazing benefits. They've learned from our volunteers, but most importantly, our volunteers have learned from the community.
Any other questions?
Please.
You mentioned that the wells are not that successful for upkeep, and usually they will be successful 1 2 years and then they dry or brackish water or whatever. How do you get them solar powered or whatever so that they don't?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I mentioned an interesting stat. So it was actually it's a fascinating study that came out. It was a meta-study that looked at individual studies and drew in research and looked at, on average, water nonprofits around the world. There's a 40% failure rate of their water projects within the first 3 years of operational. It's a fairly stunning study. And yes, it's a very high failure rate. Well, it's an industry norm, but it's a high by anyone looking at it standard. So we were so shocked by this that we started asking the questions, how do you reverse that? And very quickly we began to realize that single interventions often don't achieve the results of their peak potential. And not to get too deep in the weeds on this, but how most, so there's hand pumps, and then you go up to bore wells. So in most of the parts of where we work, the population density is such that bore wells are required. You need a continued flowed system. Even if you use gravity to store the water up high and to push it up and therefore pull it down without using energy letting gravity power it, in most cases you need at least once a week or on a frequent basis to pull out that water from deep underground to bring it towards the reservoir. So you need a power source. You need diesel. Often we'd use a lot of solar. Solar, absolutely. But even solar sometimes requires repairs and basic knowledge in the community. And even if the solar keeps working, there's a lot of other parts of the mechanics that require upkeep. And by definition, water is put to parts of the world where you're looking at the poorest of the poor. If you don't have clean water, that basic element of life, you often don't have a strong economy in the region. So what we very quickly realized was the only solution that we could find, like we put trackers on wells, so when it breaks, we know, like we put a lot of interesting, we've invested and looked at system after system. At the end of the day, the only solution we found that actually works is local ownership tied to a revenue stream. So this is a little controversial, but in our wells around the world, the local community pays to use the well. Small amounts. It goes into a fund. Like any actuarial scientist, we've been able to calculate the frequency that those wells require repairs. So based on the industry norm, they set aside the required amount of dollars. The payment level is calculated based on what is required to build the fund. And how you ensure the community can afford the payment is you have to help the community set up small businesses. Basically, we realize there's no magic bullet to end poverty in the world. But there are a lot of good silver bullets. And when you bring them together, they can create that outcome that we seek, that truly sustainable change. And we're proud of the fact that we have a near perfect rate now, in some cases 20 plus years in our water projects. Not because we're doing something miraculous, but instead the local community has the economic ability and has the knowledge and know-how how to repair it. And so the community has the means. So again, the answer to your question is coupling solutions together, adding water with another solution, in this case, economic empowerment.
I just came back from Africa, from Kenya, Tanzania, and the Maasai villages, they have no economic power. They're just shepherds and there's no water, it's all dry. So how can they sustain a well?
Well, it's a great question. So you came back from Kenya. So Kenya is one of the countries we do a lot of work in. So we've got, about 130 schools in that country. We've got a couple hospitals. We've got some boarding schools for secondary. We're actually building a college right now. So there's a strong connection we have to that country. And we mentioned the Maasai, that's part of where we work, is the Masai Mara region. how we do the economic generation in the communities is supporting women on a variety of businesses, from beehives, where they are able to sell the honey, to animal husbandry and bring in dairy cattle, from helping them in trading with small loans to purchase and resell, from big sources. Like we have, for example, large-scale agricultural production. In fact, David's got involved in this, helping the community with the dollars so that they own large projects and they're able to sell what they harvest, and that funds and supports their community. Trips and travel, we bring people in, they pay locals when they come, and they're translators and Maasai guides. And when you look, for example, at this alone, this piece of Maasai jewelry I'm wearing, we sell this now through 12,000 doors in North America. Just this one unit alone, we now have hundreds of SKUs, but this one unit we've sold 3 million of. So that profits go back to sustain the community. So what I mean to say by this is, even in the case of the Masai Mara, where I agree with you, there's herders and goats and very small economic empowerment now. When we help the community establish businesses and help them scale, like I believe the best form of charity at the end of the day is a job. And if it's a sustainable job, they can lift their families out of poverty in a sustained way. And so even in the Masai Mara, and I'd be love to have a one-on-one conversation. So if you just got back, happy to chat more. And also I'd say to chat with David a little bit, because he can tell you a little bit of what they're doing in job creation. And I see, did you want to say something? Oh, yes. Oh, I couldn't tell. Are you singling? Yeah.
It's often said that we should live long enough to embarrass our children.
Uh-oh. Good luck.
And Craig, you are one of my great inspirations. The work you and your brother do, your organization, is truly fantastic. Everybody's seeing what John does here for communities around the world, but I think we should also recognize that John and Claire and their family do some phenomenal things right here in the city for unwed mothers and for others in need. And Craig, I hope that you will agree with me, and I'm almost certain you will, because what you do so much of is you get school children doing things in their community. And it's really easy to talk about doing things around the world, but so many of us think, I'll never get there. But you don't have to go there. You just have to go about 10 blocks that direction. Following up on your message of trying to get the next generation inspired. There is so much to be done in our community right here in Vancouver. And it was a phenomenal surprise to find out that our sons Colby and Quentin had got behind the Greasy Spoon. For those of you who may not know what the Greasy Spoon is, it's a program to give free meals to people in the downtown east side that need help. And they have served over 500,000 free meals. These two guys signed up for a year. $100 feeds a person on the street a wholesome meal every day for a month. We're going to have a little fun with that. I suggested to the boys that we should get the Vancouver Club, and because it's Save on Meats, we do West, MEATS, East. And that's what they're cheering. And we're going to try and get members of the Vancouver Club to come downtown and see what's really going on. Just about 10 blocks that way. Pamela and I are so proud. As I know, Lauren, you and Melita are, with your children and the charitable work that they do. There are some phenomenal leaders in this city, in the next generation, that are making a difference. And I think probably one of my proudest moments was the other night when Quentin, Colby, and I were at a fundraiser, and we were all walking home, and it was a miserable night. Not that it ever happens in Vancouver, of course. I said, oh, damn, it's wet out there. And Quentin said, Dad, that's why I adopted your habit of putting some spare change in my pocket, so that when I'm walking home, I can put a smile on the face of somebody who needs it. Have confidence in the next generation. As Craig said, inspire them. Don't ask them. Don't tell them. They are a generation that cares. And if we give them the opportunity to lead, they will.
Thank you, Dave. Perhaps time for one more question. Is there anybody else that would like to ask Craig a question?
Oh, I love that it comes from a young person. This is the totally appropriate way to close. How you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Perfect. Can I hand you the mic?
Yeah. Awesome. It's just a simple question. What was your favorite memory on one of your trips that you went to?
Thank you, Rebecca. Rebecca, how old are you, by the way? 15. Awesome. Have you ever been to a Wee Day? No. We got to change that. You'd have a ton of fun. One of my favorite memories on a trip. Here is one to kind of close with. We were building a school, and it was all the local kids side by side with our volunteers. And so you can imagine just like passing wood and mixing cement in the local community and our volunteers, and everyone was cheering each other on and cheering each other and cheering on. And we had the roof up, and we were finishing the roof, and the final nails going in, and everyone's cheering each other on, cheering each other on. But you can only fit so many, kids and volunteers in a build site, so there's more kids watching. And when the final nail went in, they kind of shouted out to all the other kids, "The school's finished, it's yours." And the kids were kind of a little further off. And with the moment they heard the school was finished, they started walking to the school. But one walked a little bit faster, so the others didn't want to be left behind, so they started walking a little bit faster. And then they started to kind of gently, jog, and then another started to jog, and then not wanting to be left behind, another started to run, and then they started to run and started to sprint. And so before you knew it, you had this wall of kids sprinting up to the door of the school, and they stopped right in front of their school. And they started to debate in Ma, the language of the Maasai, who gets the honor to open the door to their school for the first time. And they had never had a school in their community before. So often I know, and this is why I love these volunteer trips, because you got kids who complain about going to school in the morning, and they end up realizing, oh my gosh, kids here walk 2-3 hours because they so desperately want to receive an education. And they ended up picking a 8th grade girl. She used to walk 2-3 hours each way to go to school. And they decided that she would have the honor to open the door for her school for the first time. And so they started to race inside, and they were inside their school, and they held their own notebooks, and they had their own pencils. And it was this beautiful moment as all the kids were excited and ready to learn. And they started to sit at their desks, and they started to shuffle in perfect silence. And they had their notebooks, and they had their pencil, and they were sitting at their desks, pin drop silent. And we didn't have the heart to tell them it was Sunday. And there was no school. We just finished the school. The school wasn't open. And so the volunteers, not knowing what to do, just kind of looked at each other and were like, okay, well, they reached for chalk. And they started to teach the first lessons as these kids just stared there in rapt attention. So I love the memory of, the locals and our volunteers working side by side, and that school lasting for generations for those kids. So that's why we do what we do. Thank you again. As you leave, please grab a few goodies that you have. One is a We Day book that has inspiring quotes and stories. One is The Power of We. One is The World Needs Your Kid, How to Raise Children Who Care and Contribute, which is all the stats and facts I referenced. And one is a Rafiki, which we talked about from the Masamara. So handmade by the women in the community, providing funding for their projects. And if you actually look on the back, you can enter your code online and see pinpoint on a map where your impact was delivered to change a life. So it's a great way, and the reason, by the way, we give this to you is all of this stuff is for your kids. The World Needs Your Kid, that book is for you, but all the rest, Rafikis and whatnot, how to start the conversation when you get home tonight is give this to the young person in your life. They'll go online, they'll check it out, and then just over the tablet, over the computer, just start the conversation together about what you as a family care about and what you want to change. So John, thank you again very much for the honor to be here. Thank you to your team. It was a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Craig. And, you know, it's been a very extraordinary evening. You know, Craig, you've focused a lot on what you do. You've told us how you do it. But I think the most important part of the message tonight is why you do it. You've inspired so many people here tonight. There's going to be a call to action. A lot of things will happen because of the inspiring words you've given to everybody tonight. So thank you so much, so much. And thank you all for being part of this tonight. It's great to have such a great turnout. It's been a wonderful evening, and it has been great sharing it with all of you. Thank you.